Okay, you know what? So far, we've only had one woman mentioned as one of the pilgrims. She was the prioress, who was also traveling with a nun, who was not described. But now we have a middle class woman who has the means to travel and take a vacation. And she is known as the wife of Bath, and she is a very important Canterbury pilgrim. There was a housewife come from Bath or near who sad to say, was deaf in either ear. At making cloth she had so great a bent, she bettered those of Ypres and even of Ghent. So she makes fabric. In all the parish there was no good wife should offering make before her on my life. And if one did, indeed, so wroth was she, it put her out of all her charity. Her kerchiefs were of finest weave and ground. I dare swear that they weighed a full 10 pound, which of a Sunday she wore on her head. Her hose were of the choicest scarlet red, close gartered, and her shoes were soft and new. Bold was her face, and fair, and red of hue. She'd been respectable throughout her life, with 5 churched husbands, bringing joy and strife. It seems like hard to do. 5 husbands in one lifetime? Not counting other company in youth, but therefore there's no need to speak in truth. 3 times she had journeyed to Jerusalem, and many a foreign stream she'd had to stem. At Rome she'd been, and she'd been in Boulogne, in Spain at Santiago, and at Cologne. She could tell much of wandering by the way. Gap-toothed was she, it's no lie to say. Upon an ambler easily she sat, well-wimpled eye, and fall over all a hat, as broad as is a buckler or a targe. A rug was tucked around her buttocks large, and on her feet a pair of sharpened spurs. In company well could she laugh her slurs. The remedies of love she knew perchance, for of that art she'd learned the old dance. Okay, what a fascinating character. A woman with money. She's been respectfully married 5 times. She's well dressed. She's wearing spurs and riding a horse. Very, like she's well trained in horse riding. And I mean, uh, a very rare example of a strong feminist character. And she tells one of the best stories in the Canterbury Tales, which we definitely will read. Um, Now, the gap tooth, back in those days, it was believed if you had a gap between your 2 front teeth, then you were predestined to love. That means you go from one relationship to another and you have lots of loving relationships in your lifetime. Madonna would be another example of a woman with gapped front teeth who, had a propensity to get in and out of relationships. Let's write her up. Okay, wife of Bath. That's how she's called. All right, and here's what you want to put in your notes. She was a wealthy woman from a town called Bath. That's why she's called the wife of Bath, not because she bathes a lot. Been married 5 times, well-traveled, good horseback rider. Oh, let's put in the gap teeth. Okay, we've mentioned religious folk who aren't very religious. Here's another one who is actually a delightful surprise because he is actually a good person. There was a good man of religion, too, a country parson, poor, I warrant you, but rich he was in holy thought and work. He was a learned man also, a clerk, whose Christ's own gospel truly sought to preach. Devoutly his parishioners would he teach. Benign he was, and wondrous diligent, patient in adverse times, and well content, as he was oftentimes proven, although always blithe. He was right loath to curse to get a tithe, but rather would he give, in case of doubt, unto those poor parishioners about. part of his income, even of his goods, enough with little colored all his moods. Wide was his parish, houses far asunder, but never did he fail, for rain or thunder, in sickness or in sin or any state, to visit to the farthest, small and great, going afoot, and in his hand a staff his fine example to his flock he gave. That first he wrought, and afterwards he taught, out of the gospel then that text he caught, and this figure he added thereunto, that if gold rust, what shall poor iron do? For if the priest be foul in whom we trust, what wonder if a layman yield to lust? And shame it is, if priest take thought for keep, a terrible shepherd, shepherding clean sheep, well ought a priest example good to give, by his own cleanness, how his flock should live. He never let his benefice for hire, leaving his flock to flounder in the mire, and ran to London up to old St. Paul's, to get himself a chantry there for souls. Nor in some brotherhood did he withhold, but dwelt at home, and kept so well the fold, that never wolf could make his plans miscarry. He was a shepherd, and not a mercenary, and holy though he was, and virtuous, to sinners he was not impiteous, nor haughty in his speech, nor too divine, but in all teaching prudent and benign, to lead folk into heaven, but by stress of good example was his business. But if some sinful one proved obstinate, but who it might, of high or low estate, him he reproved, and sharply, as I know, there is nowhere a better priest, I trow. He had no thirst for pomp or reverence, nor made himself a special spiced conscience, but Christ's own lore and his apostles 12 he taught, but first he followed it himself. Okay, so this is a good example of a clergy member. He's a poor country parson who isn't in it for the money. He wants to help people. So he travels even through storms to go visit people in his flock because he acts like a shepherd. He follows in the ways of Jesus. And I don't even know where this word came from. They just put it in the translation. That's crazy. Okay, the clergy is definitely where the parson falls. He is a good, pious priest who is poor and takes care of his congregation like a shepherd takes care of his flock. Okay, with the parson, there was a plowman. This was his brother, that many a load of dung and many another had scattered for a good true toiler. He, living in peace and perfect charity, he loved God most, and that with his whole heart, at all times, though he played or plied his art. And next his neighbor, even as himself, he'd thresh and dig, with never thought of pelf. For Christ's own sake, for every poor white, all without pay. If it lay in his might, he paid his taxes fully, fairly well, both by his own toil and by stuff he'd sell. In a tabard he rode on a mare. All right, so this is the parson's brother. Okay, I didn't put lower class, so I'm just going to put the plowman in the middle class. He was a poor farmer who was devout like his brother, the parson. He does not tell a tale. Okay, now we're getting to some of the most interesting characters of the Pilgrims. There were also a reeve and miller there, a summoner, manciple, and pardoner, and these beside myself made all there were. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more descriptions of pilgrims, and then he'll end the prologue. These characters all tell stories, and they're the most dynamic characters in the Canterbury Tales. The miller was a stark churl, be it known, hardy and big of brawn and big of bone, which was well proved, for when he went on lamb, At wrestling, never failed he of the ram. That means he liked to wrestle because he was a big guy, and whenever he did wrestle, he would always win the prize, which was usually like a male goat. He was a chunky fellow, broad of build. He'd heave a door from hinges if he willed, or break it through by running with his head. His So he likes to break down doors with his head. He's quite the ruffian. His beard, as any sow or fox, was red, and broad it was as if it were a spade. Upon the coping of his nose he had a wart, and thereon stood a tuft of hairs. He had a hairy wart on his nose, red as the bristles in an old sow's ears. His nostrils, they were black and very wide. A sword and buckler bore he by his side. His mouth was like a furnace door for sighs. He was a jester and could poetize, but mostly all of sin and ribaldries. He could steal corn and full thrice charge his fees. And yet he had a thumb of gold, begad. A white coat and blue hood he wore, this lad. A bagpipe he could blow well, be it known, and with that same he brought us out of town. All right, so he likes to play a bagpipe. He's a big ruffian. He likes to tell dirty stories and sing songs that have dirty lyrics. And he steals. Like a miller is basically a guy with a windmill, and you bring your corn or your flour, and he will grind it into powder or flour for you. But the miller usually just keeps some of what he mills for you as payment. But this particular miller is corrupt, and he takes more than what he should get as payment. Okay, so the miller is a big, dirty ruffian who likes to fight and tell. Oh, steal, not still. And tell dirty stories. I'm going to stop at the miller for this video, and there's only one video left to go, and it's some of the most important characters in the story. So stay tuned or find the video.